My name is Adam Suschitzky, and I'm a cinematographer. And I was born into a family of cinematographers. My grandfather, Wolfgang Suschitzky, began the family tradition, and my father followed him, and I followed my father, Peter Suschitzky. And I really began as a photographer, taking stills from a very young age, my first camera in my hands at about 8 years old, I suppose. And I was keen to produce my own images. I'd watched my grandfather in the darkroom that he shared in the family home, and I'd watched my father produce these still images. This was my introduction to image making, if you like. To be able to produce a photograph was my ambition at that time. And so experiments happened very young, and then photography became a very important thing in my life as a teenager. And I read Don McCullen's autobiography, and I had a fantasy to become a war photographer. And when I announced this to my family, they were absolutely horrified and promptly did their very best to persuade me that actually film might be a more interesting and appropriate career. And thank goodness they did. And I began as an assistant with my father, and we did several films together in Canada and Hungary and the Czech Republic. And I was very excited to then try to become a cinematographer myself. I was lucky enough to get a place at the National Film and Television School in Beaconsfield here in the UK to study cinematography. And that gave me the sort of ability to experiment and learn from some fantastic cinematographers who came across our path at that time. Freddie Francis and his gaffer, who'd flown in the RAF together and then made multiple movies together, came and gave master classes, and Billy Williams. These were inspiring moments for me, and I got to shoot documentaries and music videos and commercials, a whole range of things, allowing me to really try my hand. I'd watched my father, I'd watched other cinematographers as an assistant, but there I was able to actually do it myself, and it launched me into a career as a cinematographer in my own right. I wanted to make feature films initially, and I made a couple of low-budget films. The BBC, though, really gave me a lot of breaks in the beginning, and I soon became known for period dramas, and I did a lot of such things as Jane Austen, and opportunities, kept coming in television that sort of put me on a path, if you will, to build a career in that area where, although my grandfather and father had been more involved in film, I was finding a lot of very interesting projects happening in television, which sort of brought me to a point where I began to get interested in working in North America. I particularly loved American movies from a young age, and of course American television as well. And so I suppose in the last 10 years have been much more concentrated on the North American market, and have been doing a series over there for streaming networks and television networks. So my most recent project took me to Toronto in Canada to shoot a spin-off of a successful show that was originally called Orphan Black, and now is called Orphan Black Echoes. And this is in its first season, and I launched the show with the pilot and then stayed on board to shoot the rest of the season, alternating with a very talented expat British cinematographer who alternated with me. But we were lucky enough to start just at the time when the Alexa 35 had been launched. And I was incredibly excited to try my hand and see what this new camera could offer. I've been a very loyal ARRI camera user, shall we say, for as long as I can remember. And I've been enjoying the LF immensely, and I took the LF to Thailand a year ago into the northern jungle there, and it performed spectacularly well. So I was thinking, well, how is a new camera going to do any better than that? So I wanted to compare it to the camera that I was most familiar with, which was the LF. And then we also had one other competitor alongside that. And it was incredible what I saw in front of me in this test room. The depth of color that came from this new camera, the dynamic range immediately just eradicated, put into the shade, however one wants to say it, the other cameras. Even the LF couldn't compete on the dynamic range. And it was a very exciting proposition that I was going to have the first couple of cameras available in Canada to shoot our show. And that sort of put me on a very excited path to see what this camera was capable of. And, you know, this series is set 25 years into the future, so we were going to have some sci-fi elements as well as more realistic elements. There was landscape, a lot of lighting of sets involved, elaborate sci-fi interiors with a more futuristic edge to them. So I knew that color was going to be very important to me on this show, and I also knew that the dynamic range was going to be very exciting to explore the potential now that this camera was going to offer. So dynamic range has become my obsession with digital photography. I really enjoy a very subtle roll-off into the highlights and into the lowlights. I try to expose for those highlights, and I suppose I've been very obsessive in the past with cameras not, shall we say, clipping or losing that detail, that ability to create a subtle image in the highlight. So traditionally I would always be underexposing if the highlights were quite strong, and it was that end of the scale that I was always waiting for a sensor to come on the market that could really handle highlights in a way that I felt was still missing. Lowlights seem to be not a problem so much with most manufacturers. We've had a period of, you know, extensive low-light photography that lots of people have spoken about already, but highlights still were the kind of undefined area of digital cinematography for me that I was hoping would be the next frontier, really. A resolution I wasn't that concerned by. We'd already reached fairly sharp images, but you know, skin tone improves with highlight definition. Skies improve. I'm always trying to get that depth, that three-dimensionality into the image. And to me, if your highlights roll off gently, you have a much more sophisticated image. So it was a revelation when we shot our first scene outside, and we had incredibly bright sky and people dressed in white, sort of scientific overalls, head to toe with masks, in a landscape that was quite dark in tone. So you had this enormous set of values. We had a multi-ethnic cast, so underneath these masks, the camera had to also deal with different skin tones. And I turned to my DIT and I just said, well, okay, so this is the first time we're not underexposing the image in order to hold these skies, or in order to expose the white suits without them burning out. We are now working literally by eye. It's literally what the eye is seeing. We're not having to panic about the overexposure of the sky and bring in lots of light in the foreground to try to balance the faces. It was evident straight away that this sensor had completely pushed the boundary. The conversation about film and digital has sort of slowed down now, luckily, because the digital cameras have become so beautiful. I, for one, am very passionate about digital imagery and not nostalgic about film or film grain, because I feel there's so much potential that a digital sensor offers me. I love the flexibility that it gives me. And one of the exciting new features of this camera with the Alexa 35 is the high sensitivity that it offers without any compromise to one's image. I particularly like a very fine grain image, so I tend to shoot at 800, sometimes less. But what's interesting in the work that I do, which is often with 2 or 3 cameras each day, as you compare the lenses that each camera may be on, we might be on a 27 with one, we might be on a 40 or a 50 with another, and so on. As the lenses get longer on the other cameras, I'm trying to equalize the depth of field in order that the cuts are more seamless. Because if one shoots at 2.8 on the wide and you're at 2.8 on the tight, you have a much shallower depth of field, which to me jars as you edit between these shots. So for the first time, I'm able to use the higher ISOs without having to increase my lighting to equalize the depth of field. So I might have 2.8 on the wide shot and then shoot at 1600 or even 2500 on the tighter shot and give me an extra stop or more of depth of field. And that is a really exciting and totally flexible way to work. And we can do that instantly without altering anything on the set. Nobody has to know about it. The audience doesn't see the difference because the grain or the noise, whatever one wants to say, is so minimal between these high ISOs. So in the kind of work that I do, we work very, very fast. In the US and Canada, we're doing 8-day episodes on this last show. And that's some of the faster work that I've done. And it's exciting because everybody has to be there at their best game to make that happen in all the departments. And you're relying on each other to make sure that a set is ready before we turn up, and that all the equipment is going to help you achieve that task. So every decision that I'm making is based on what is the story, what is the look, but how am I going to do it in the time that I have? And those 3 things, plus the budget, it has to equalize the budget. Those 3 or 4 things are constantly on my mind. So to get a tool that is going to help you achieve your work at speed, like this Alexa 35, is amazing. It's allowing me to work at a much faster speed on set. It's handling those highlights in the background, in the skies, in the skin tones. So I'm spending much less time equalizing the dynamic range of a camera. Maybe 6 to 10 years ago, one had to really support a sensor in the lighting, in the photography, in the staging, in the art direction, to actually get that sensor across the line, because they were more contrasty, they had a lower dynamic range. But this new camera is allowing us to really now work at speed and create beautiful images. But also, it's now faster in post-production. So I took the material from Orphan Black and we graded the first 3 episodes that I'd shot, and I couldn't believe how quickly we were post-producing the show. Far less power windows to take care of highlights. It was quite magnificent how quick and easy the camera was allowing us to get through the material. And it's really important for a production to save money not only on the shoot and time, but in post-production. And to me, that's a kind of a win-win when the sensor is not only helping you on the day of the shoot, but in the post-production. You know, I'm not relying on post-production. One of the myths is we have time to fix it in post, and that's absolutely gone out the window. Whether there was time once, I don't know, but I've never had it. So I love to work with a camera that has this kind of subtlety to the image that allows me to be confident on the day and confident that it's going to be there for me in post. So it's a very important moment that we've arrived at, with a sensor that you're able to light totally by eye without the anxiety that one used to have about highlights clipping and shadows disappearing. If I need to manipulate later, I know that there's a tolerance in this sensor. Color depth is what blew me away on this camera. I could see straight away on set, on my monitor, which was not anything particularly special. This was a 2K monitor, I suspect. But immediately, I could see this color depth was absolutely revolutionary. And what it did was, to me, this camera made skin tones so much more beautiful, because there's such a subtlety of color. And then the color separation. I was using a lot of very bold colors in this sci-fi, often built into the set. And the separation of color was so pleasing. You know, no bleeding of one into the other. And sure enough, when I went to color time them in post-production, it was just a breeze to control and pick out a certain color and desaturate one and bring up another. It's building a kind of very three-dimensional image. It's very beautiful to see that as a cinematographer. We look at images all the time, and I've used all the cameras on the market, and suddenly this just leapt out. And every day I'd say to my DIT, I can't stop saying it, but this is so beautiful. The color is something very special. So I'd love to talk about the resolution of the camera. You know, I'd come from shooting a lot with the LF, and I'd just come off a show called The Walking Dead, where we'd been shooting the LF, and I loved the images we got from that, and the show looked fantastic. So to switch from a large format sensor to, in a way, I would say back to Super 35 was a kind of a slightly anxious moment. Am I going to enjoy this greater depth of field, these wider lenses? Am I going to miss that kind of medium format photography that I'd got to know and really love? But this camera offered something so new that bridged that gap beautifully. It has the resolution of the LF. It has the feeling of a beautiful fine grain image. And the Alexa 35 is just a very subtle reproducer of skin tone, and very quickly I realized this was a huge asset for a show that was all about the faces of these characters. So it was exciting to see that increased resolution is not increased harshness. It's actually another tool set for us as cinematographers, as storytellers, to draw the audience in. And looking at the 4K image in a post-production suite is just beautiful. I mean, it's like having IMAX in your front living room. It has this lovely quality. So I was very happy with that new resolution. So choosing lenses is a particular thing for me. It goes back a long way. I shoot with Leica lenses on stills cameras all the time, and I'm really enamored by what the lens can do. How is it going to tell my story? Is it going to complement the tone of the script that we're embarking on? And so I look for a lens that is going to enhance that story, but not overpower it in its style, or stamp a look onto it that would be too strong. This particular show I just did, being a sci-fi, you could have gone very retro with it. One could have used really uncoated lenses. That would have been one take. I wanted something more subtle, I suppose, that would not draw the eye to the photography self-consciously. I suppose I really enjoy photography or cinematography that creeps up on you. You watch the episode and then you think, goodness, that was really nicely photographed and designed. But actually, I was involved in the story. I wasn't thinking about each frame. I wasn't thinking about the camera movement. I wasn't thinking about the lighting. These things want to just be subtly underscoring the characters and the storytelling. So I went into White's in Toronto, and they were magnificently supportive. And I said, here's a list of lenses I'd like to test. And this list was very long. And they were very sweet and brought in lenses from all over the place. And we had this test day with a huge bench full of mixed glass. Some of it large format, some of it Super 35, some from the 60s, you know, all different tastes. And I've shot with the Master Primes a lot in the past, and there was just this sort of sweet spot when we put the Masters on the Alexa 35 that just complemented the colors. It complemented the contrast. It just gave me that subtlety, I suppose, that I had been looking for, and gave me the recipe that was what I needed for that show. I'd love to add that the Super 35 sensor is very much like the way the human eye sees. And it was very refreshing to go back and realize that in the 19th century, when they invented film and the film gate, that this balance of the Super 35 sensor and that focal length that covers that sensor size produces something very natural. There's something very human about the perspective that Super 35 affords you. This new camera is very versatile in terms of its size. Like most productions, we really put this camera through its paces in terms of platforms that we shot on. I would say that 95% of our show was on the dolly, but then we would have handheld. We would also use the Steadicam, and we would also use a lot of jib arm and crane, technocrane work. And no matter how big your studio is, no matter how big your location is, you're always in the corner of that studio. And you always want that camera to be as small as you possibly can get it, because you want that extra 6 inches back. And of course, working from a small camera out is always the way you want to do it. And I really appreciate that the design of this camera is still in a beautiful form factor. And it helps switch from one platform to another very seamlessly. I've been lucky enough to use ARRI cameras, ARRI digital cameras now since their early days with the D21, and then the Alexa Mini after that, and then the LF, and now Alexa 35. So it's been a really interesting journey for me. I get excited by new technology. As I say, I'm really fascinated by digital cinematography. I think that when there's a new camera on the market, it helps you, it propels me into new territory. And I get excited to learn everything I can about that sensor. What is it capable of? How far can it go before I break it, if you like. I definitely haven't been able to break the Alexa 35. And it starts to speak to you. It tells me what it's comfortable with, what its sweet spot is, exposure-wise. How does it interact with faces and so on? And I've learned huge amounts by working with these ARRI cameras. And they, in turn, have given me the courage to experiment with these projects that I take these cameras onto. And I am someone who tends to live in fear of repeating my work. So I like to always feel like I'm breaking some new ground without it becoming self-conscious. I don't want the image to overpower the story. So the camera and I become sort of partners. And I'm just thrilled to see the evolution of digital sensors through ARRI's extraordinary work. I mean, I just had to write and tell you guys after I had finished this project, because I suppose I'd been hoping that digital sensors would increase the dynamic range specifically. And it's been some time coming with incremental improvements, but this is now a huge step forward. And where will that go in the future? Part of it depends on what platform people will watch their material on, the size of screens. I mean, right here we are in Ari's facility with these giant screens behind me. And of course, we need better and better resolution for that. Obviously, I think subtlety is where I hope we will keep going. It's not about sharpness. It's really about the subtlety of an image. I can walk into a gallery that has a daguerreotype, and I'm moved at how detailed it is and how sharp it is, but really how timeless the storytelling is. And I hope that in the future that's what Ari will concentrate on. It's the subtlety and beauty of an image. That's it.